All right, I'm gonna do a one take here, walking through how to use Astria Dusknet. We're gonna be deploying a local rollup, which is one that's gonna run on my local MacBook using our dev cluster to run a local Kubernetes cluster. And then we'll see how that goes. So just starting here, you can go to docs.astria.org. That'll bring you to our Dusknet docs where we have running a rollup on Dusknet. This overview is going to give you the dependencies you need. You need these two repos. The first one's going to be the Astria Mono repo. The second one is going to be our dev cluster repo. You're also going to need the following tools as prereqs. So Foundry, Docker, recommend Docker Desktop if you're running Mac OS. The Kubernetes CLI, so kubectl, Helm, Kind, which is Kubernetes and Docker, and then Just, which is basically like a Rust version of a Makefile. These are the actual versions of the Astria software that we're going to be running. So we'll just jump into a local rollup deployment. This is going to tell you what all the endpoints are for our remote network right now. We auto deploy an EVM, so you don't need to worry about these because we're going to be deploying another rollup to it. But you can see the sequencer RPC here, as well as the sequencer faucet to fund your account there. I'm actually just going to jump ahead real quick here, and I'm going to set up our development cluster first before going through the other steps, because that's actually going to take a little bit. So I have Docker Desktop already running, and so we're going to go to our dev cluster repo here, and if we just run just create cluster, that's going to start setting up a Kubernetes cluster, and that failed. And it looks like that failed because I already have stuff. So we're going to run just clean, which is going to delete the previous cluster. And now we can run just create cluster. And that's going to start setting up a cluster there. So we'll jump back up to the top. So creating our Genesis account. So for our rollup, we're going to want to create a Genesis account. The rollup's going to come with its own faucet enabled, and this Genesis balance is where that faucet's going to be funded out of. So we're going to use Cast for this. Just create a new wallet. You know, it like goes without saying, I think, don't, use an actual wallet that you care about. So we'll export the rollup there. We'll export our Genesis balance or our Genesis address here. For balance, we want to use like a pretty large number. I don't know what that is. I think that might be like 10 or 100 ETH or something like that. So we'll get that set up. Yeah, again, never use a private network you actually use. We're also going to need the Astria CLI. So that's going to be included in the Astria repo. You can just install CLI. That will run cargo install for it. Mine is already installed here, and then that will configure it so that you have the Astria CLI repo or Astria CLI command line tool available here. Now we want to get the current sequencer block, and that's because we want to start the rollup at the current sequencer block, not the Genesis block, because I don't have to sync from there. So let's just look at what the sequencer block is. We'll set this to the initial sequencer block height. There we go. And then we want to pick a rollup name. So export your rollup name. I'm just going to call this Josh Local. We need a network ID. This is just whatever, like a string. I've just been using chains of numbers for every time I create a new one. We have Genesis address set. We have balance set. We have initial sequencer height. So we're going to use the Astria CLI to create this rollup config. So we'll set this, and then we replaced all these with environment variables. So we'll set all of these up. We have the Genesis address. We have the balance. We have the initial sequencer block height, right? And then these are already coded to what Dusknet is actually set at right now. Okay, you're not actually going to like that because of these. Okay, there we go. All right. Now we can actually run the Astria CLI rollup config create. That's going to create this local configuration file just to check that that actually is there and looks correct. We can see this. So that's all set well and good. And okay, so we're gonna export that configuration file, local rollup. And then this is where we get to the setup local environment step. So we can see that's already set up. We can look at that with kubectl get node. We're gonna see that there's the Astria dev cluster control plane. So that's the one node we're actually running for our control plane. And so now we're going to deploy an Ingress controller into this. So we ran create cluster. Ingress controller, this is going to deploy essentially like Nginx, which is going to be used as a reverse proxy. And this will allow us to actually reach the various components of our rollup locally using the localdev.me host name. So now we can set this to wait for the Ingress. That's just going to pull this basically, and it will let us know when that's created. Going back to the sequencer account here, so we're going to create a new account on the sequencer. They'll get the private key, pub key, address. Again, nothing sensitive here, right? Okay, so we're going to set the sequencer private key to there. And then we have the cluster up and running. So if we look for that Ingress, we can see that we have this pod running here, right? You can also see the service for it over here, right? So we can see that we have a service here. We have the pods for the Ingress controller. So now all we need to do is actually deploy the rollup. So in here where we have all the environment variables set, and in the directory where we have this Josh local rollup configuration, we can just run the CLI rollup deployment. This is going to use Helm to deploy our rollup, and we're going to get all these names of our stuff out. This is going to deploy it in a namespace that got created, the Astria dev cluster namespace. So if we look at kubectl get pod in that namespace, we can see we have some pods spinning up. We can just set a watch, and this will let us know when these pods come up. And then what we're going to be looking for here is when these pods come up, the Ingress should pick them up, because one of the parts being created in this Helm chart is actually an Ingress that will be picked up by Nginx, and that will be configured such that our block explorer, our faucet, and our RPC for our rollup are all going to be available at blockscout.yourrollupname.localdev.me, etc., etc. So if we look at these, if they're done, container creating. So it looks like block scout is not up. We can check the logs here. Conductor is going to be the component in here that's actually going to be syncing. We have to check it in the appropriate namespace. So conductor is going to be the component that's actually be sequencing. You can see that starting from the block height we provided. You can follow this as just standard Kubernetes stuff. Now we can see we have our block scout all the way up. So our local rollup name was your rollup name. So we had Josh local, right? So I should be able to go in here and go to block scout dot, and then we'll replace your rollup name with Josh-local. We should see this load, and we can see there are blocks being produced. It's on a 2-second block time. This is just using the sequencer. So we can see blocks are being produced, so let's submit some transactions here. Also, one note, if you look at this before it has synced to head, so for example, like if you used like block height 0 as your initial block and it had to go sync through like 200,000 blocks, block scout seems to throw like 500s until it's fully synced. So let's use cast. So we export our ETH RPC here, our rollup name, right? This is actually your rollup name. So we can echo ETH RPC URL. See, okay, we have Josh local. We can do cast block 0, and we should be able to see that there's a block, right? We can also do receive address. I just have this address. This is just like a MetaMask I have. We can do a cast bounce on this address. You can see the balance is 0. If we wanted to look at let's see if we have this all the way up here. Maybe. If we bothered to record the public key we actually had for our Genesis I guess we can just actually look at the rollup config. So if we want to look at this bounce, we have to put the 0x. There we go. So we can see we have funds there. Let's say we wanted to fund our receive address. We can go here, and actually we're going to go to the faucet here, which you just change block scout to faucet. Then we have our faucet. So we'll copy and paste this address here, paste that there, request, we can see the transaction hash there. Go to this, we see one transaction, right? It sent 1 ETH there. We do a cast balance on our receive address, and we have that guy there, right? Okay. So there you go. We have, you know, the minimum viable for that running. Yeah. In some follow-up videos, we'll be going through how to deploy this on all the other cloud providers. So we'll do DigitalOcean, we'll do Azure, we'll do GCP, and we'll do AWS, even though I don't want to. But yeah, look forward to those videos. Thanks, guys.